How to breach and still be able to look behind you, using Peeker's advantage and other techniques to dominate your PvP fights, where to find fruits, and a few other tricks. These are just some of the tips we're going to be going over today. As for today's video, we'll be focusing a little bit more or less on advanced tips. What I mean by advanced is that we'll be going over tips that go a little bit deeper than the basic mechanics type of tips. Like for example, I'm not going to be mentioning how you can extract while you're downed, or that you can trade your free augment loadout for a better augment, as that's probably a mechanic you've picked up after playing the game for a few hours, or well, from other more beginner friendly tip videos out there. I will still have a few pretty basic tips included in this video because these are tips I consider indispensable when making a video like this, so I could not leave them behind. Let's get on to the tips, but first let me show you an interesting fact. Did you know that if you die to someone who happens to be cheating and that person is banned for it, you actually get all of your loot back? This is actually so cool. I had it happen to me this morning, so I figured I would share it with you guys. But yeah, anyways, on to the tip. Let's start off with a rather weird trick, which is the Barricade Kit climbing trick. If you put a Barricade Kit underneath your feet and you climb on top of it at the same time, you can vault over it and find yourself in some rather high ground if used correctly. I do think this might get patched at some point, but the use cases for it are pretty limited. I will say though, this guy that I was fighting earlier did not see that coming. What won't be patched about the Barricade Kit though is the fact that it is an absolute monster of an utility. It completely blocks off shots and explosives, and it, well, is of course deployable cover, and it's fantastic to save you and your teammates from getting pushed by AI or players, as well as give you guys some space to recover and re-engage. Let's also go ahead and do a 2-for-1 tip here on the zip lines. First, you can swap directions of the zip if you start going the wrong way by just jumping off the zip and pressing E again while looking in the other direction. And it's also important to know that despite the momentum looking like you would absolutely break your legs, you can actually jump out of a zip line as you're flying downwards like this and put yourself in some pretty interesting positions, such as this jump here in the damn battlegrounds. Don't worry, you're not going to take any damage. Now, a tip that I must mention is, of course, use 3D peeking to your advantage. Even though some players are not happy about it, Arc Raiders is a third-person game, and much like any other PvP third-person game, using 3D peeks will give you constant information before engaging, and it allows you to make way more proactive decisions rather than reactive ones. But one thing that I'm personally not a huge fan of in Arc Raiders as of the time of making this video is that Arc Raiders has a serious degree of peeker's advantage. This will probably change over time, but this is something you can constantly abuse, and it will probably have it constantly be abused on you. Essentially, what peeker's advantage is where the peeker sees the stationary player for a fraction of a second before the defender sees the peeker. What this leads to is situations like the gameplay you're seeing here in the background. I'm sure that on my opponent's screen, he could see me for at least a quarter to a half second before he took the shot, but on my screen, I could see nothing but his arm after the shot was already fired from him, which makes that fight nearly unwinnable for me. What this means in practice is using corners for quick shoulder peeks will give you a severe advantage in fights. I mean, you've probably noticed this by playing Arc Raiders for a few hours. People just shoulder peek right and left with shotguns and anvils and ferals. But yeah, I will say though, this is probably going to be looked at by Embark because this makes fights feel kind of cheesy. Now let's go ahead and go over a few good settings. Under on accessibility, I would recommend turning off the blocked line of fire setting. Now, this is a personal preference, of course. I mean, most of these settings are, but give this one a try, especially when you have smooth move on. When you're taking fights, at least for me personally, the crosshair kept throwing me off as it would be flicking right and left instead of just staying dead center. And yeah, I feel like it kind of was hurting my gameplay a little bit. I'll also say you'll learn if your shot is blocked or not a lot faster with this turned off. You'll get a good sense of the angles the more you play with this off. Plus, even if you have it turned off, the dot will show if your shot is blocked or not, so yeah, at least it's not the whole crosshair. Also, while in the settings, make sure you bind shoulder swap to a comfortable key. You want to be constantly shoulder swapping in this game, especially when you're clearing angles and engaging to give you an edge. Personally, I have mine on mouse 4, which is one of the buttons on the side of my mouse, and I can do the shoulder swaps very, very comfortably. Another noteworthy settings change is putting your entire graphics settings on low. I'm very sad to give you this tip. I really wish it wasn't isn't true, but it does give you an edge. If you don't care enough about it, then by all means, I truly understand. But yeah, let's go back to the tip. Put everything on low with the exception of post-processing. Not only is visibility going to be far clearer, but certain objects aren't even going to render at certain distances, such as bushes. But the players do always render. This isn't always a great thing, as sometimes you might shoot at a player only to find out they're behind a rock, but it will give you more information, and you will also of course gain way more FPS, and the game will feel a lot better. Another setting you probably didn't notice is that Arc Raiders has a decent degree of negative mouse acceleration. This is a common problem in Unreal Engine titles. You can test it out for yourself. Just go in practice range, then very slowly turn your mouse a full 360 degrees. Get a general idea of how much mousepad space that took for you to do that 360. And now go ahead and do that with a really big fast flick. Likely what's going to happen is your big fast flick will turn far less than your slow turning, despite using the same mousepad space. If this is true for you, turn your mouse polling rate to 250 Hz. Most mouses do give this option, but sadly mine doesn't, so I'm out of luck for this one. Just hoping Embark fixes this negative acceleration issue. By the way, if you're on controller, of course this isn't an issue. Now with all of these previous tips in mind, it should be clear that the person who's rushing or overextending is always at a disadvantage, and the defender will always have the advantage. So the tip is, try not to rush. Usually playing aggressive in this game will require you to constantly be swapping angles and using utilities, not necessarily bum rushing your opposition. Speaking of overextending, never hold an angle wide. I know it'll be tempting to hold an angle after you've nailed your enemy a few times, but due to all the previous tips I've just mentioned, holding an angle in this game will just lead to you giving up all of the edge you have in your fight. If your enemy player is holding behind a cover and only abusing Peeker's advantage and not really exposing themselves at all, these are the moments where utilities will be a necessity. Heavy fuse grenades, impact grenades, blaze grenades are just some of the fantastic utilities to flush your enemy out of their position. The most powerful utility though to force your enemy to make a move, in my opinion, is the Snitch Scanner. You might have heard about it by now. Snitch Scanners will spawn a small arc after exploding, and if you throw these scanners behind the cover your enemy is hiding behind, the player will immediately get aggroed, and at this point you're more or less free to commit to pushing them, because at this point your enemy will have two choices. Either they focus on the arc and get pushed by you, or they focus on you and get shot by the arc. So either way, they're in trouble. And if you have multiple scanners, you can just throw a couple of them at your enemy and they will have to leave that cover at all costs, since they're not really going to be able to handle all that PvE threat. For the background footage here, apologies, I don't have the ideal showcase, as I'm kind of hoarding all of my Snitch Scanners right now. Now, if you're the one having to handle PvE threats in general, for the Wasps and Hornets, keep in mind you only need to destroy 2 engines. Just make sure they're both on the same side so they can keep themselves up and slam into the ground. If you destroy the engines diagonally, they might be able to keep themselves up in the air. Now, if you're handling pops, ticks, or heck, even some of the wasps as well, you can melee these enemies with a lot of ease, and it will be much more silent than shooting them. In the case of pops and ticks, just one swing is enough to kill, and it's worth mentioning that pops do not deal AoE damage if you melee them. The melee weapon, by the way, can be swung 2 different ways. On PC, mouse 1 does horizontal swings, and mouse 2 will do vertical swings. Vertical swings are better at hitting enemies that are a little bit higher up, such as flying arc or cameras and turrets as well. For Rocketeers, Leapers, Bombardiers, and Bastions, if you're solo, I would recommend just kind of avoiding these. Maybe in the late game you'll have enough firepower to handle them, but early and mid game, I would just recommend using Wolfpacks on them. You're probably going to end up looting a few of these over the course of your runs. About 1 to 2 Wolfpacks and maybe a few extra shots if you're looking for Rocketeer, Leaper, or Bombardier parts. Other than that though, solo is a lot more dangerous to take these on and will likely lead to players chasing after all that noise and possibly killing you. One very basic tip you probably know by now is that heavy ammo is better against arc and light ammo will be worse. But to clarify that, yes, it is generally better to use heavy ammo against arc because it deals extra armor damage. It doesn't necessarily deal extra arc damage, just more armor damage. So if you're hitting a weak spot that has no armor, or its armor is completely broken, medium and light ammo will do just fine. Another PvE tip is that certain arc are better left alive on purpose. For example, if you're going into the damn Battlegrounds tower, you might be better off leaving the turrets on the elevator alive. Yes, you're probably gonna take some damage, but they will serve as sort of an alarm system for you. Once you hear them blasting away as you're clearing the tower for loot, you know players have just arrived and fights are about to go down. The same will apply for cameras, albeit they are a little bit more quiet. So the tip is, use arc as an alarm system if you're looting nearby. Another interesting and underused tools are traps as well as noisemakers. When you're taking on a big room, much like the previous tip, and want to loot in peace, leave traps at the door as this will give you an edge in combat, as well as of course alerting you someone's trying to hunt you down. This is especially useful in solo play. On the same note, always close your doors. Once again, not only do they alert you someone's coming in, but you also prevent yourself from getting shot in the back, and if you leave the door open, you will allow your enemy to know someone is in that room, so they're going to be coming in extra prepared. Now onto a crouching tip, it's worth pointing out that much like most games, moving while shooting will increase your weapon spread, or bloom, whatever you want to call it, while standing still will decrease it, and crouching will decrease it even more so. So depending on the weapon, like for example the Torrente, it's best to crouch before blasting away. It's also worth paying attention to what kind of weapon you're bringing into a raid, as that can severely dictate how you're going to play your run. One concept that I know the final players out there are familiar with is the concept of poke versus dive weapons. Some weapons are going to specialize in poking enemies from a distance, but suck at rushing into them. And some weapons will be fantastic at rushing an enemy down, but suck at taking long distance poking fights. This is a pretty obvious concept that you shouldn't rush an enemy with, let's say, a Feral in your hand, and that you probably shouldn't challenge a Feral with like a Stitcher in your hand. But I felt I should point out this tip because I feel like, much like the finals, Embark made sure to separate these two styles of weapons. And if you make stupid mistakes like me, where you rush at an enemy with only a Renegade, you will have a really bad time unless you're literally hitting every single headshot. So especially when you bring a free loadout, depending what the game gives you, your gameplay style will have to change drastically depending on the weapon you're given. With this in mind, it's often a good idea when trying to make a decent loadout to have a poke weapon equipped and a dive weapon equipped as well. But you can of course just simplify it as a poke weapon, it will be the long distance fight weapons, and the dive weapons are going to be the close quarter ones. If you have both of these equipped, you can approach any fight comfortably. On a contradictory note, I would recommend always going into a run with only one weapon equipped. This is more of a personal decision, but I like to always leave a weapon slot available so I can extract any other weapon I find as I loot around in the Rust Belt. You just gotta keep in mind which weapon you're bringing with you to fit your playstyle accordingly. Now onto skills. Early on, I would recommend unlocking field crafting as quickly as you can. This is another basic tip, but field crafting is indispensable, especially early on and in your free loadout runs where you constantly lack bandages and shield recharges. Field crafting will cover that for you. Speaking of skill trees, much like you've probably heard elsewhere, I'd recommend going for the early game movement skills, such as Marathon Runner and Youthful Lungs, and then you go for field crafting, or vice versa, it's up to you. But I do find these three nodes essential early on. I find that specifically the survival tree, especially in solo play, is really important. As for stamina, you should also min-max sliding as much as you possibly can. Getting used to sliding anytime you're going down a ramp or stairs will save a lot of stamina. And not just that, stamina will actually recover while you're sliding instead of using it. Speaking of stamina, one great use of your stamina are dodge rolls, but that's not the tip. The tip actually is if you press to swap your weapons and then immediately press to dodge roll, you will come out of the other side of the roll with the weapon already equipped. This is especially good when pushing down a player or just trying to get your weapon out as someone is pushing you. Another stamina tip is to never waste your stamina stamina fully. If you get caught by a player or even arc while you're drained for stamina, it can quite literally mean you are dead just because you didn't keep some stamina on reserve. If you're past the very early game, you can always just bring some adrenaline shots as well, and this is going to be a non-issue. Now you've just started up and you're wondering what you should focus on first. I would recommend you prioritize these 5 things immediately upon starting arc raiders, or maybe even after prestiging. You should focus on increasing your stash size for more overall loot. You should also focus on getting scrappy to the maximum level to have consistent passive income running even if you're dying out there in your runs. And you should also focus on completing quests, as these give important items and XP, and also focusing on workbenches and upgrading them as soon as possible will help you a ton in the long run. And lastly, focus on leveling your character up as well to make your overall experience far smoother. A lot of players will go in raids with no purpose other than to just kill whatever they come across, but that will actually harm them in the long run, as they're not really going to progress anywhere. Ideally, you do these 5 things simultaneously, but yeah, just do what you can when you can. The amount of things to focus on in arc raiders can be overwhelming. So personally, what I recommend is to always just focus on 2 to 3 items per raid, and whatever you get extra is just a plus. But if you go into a raid and there's like 20 items you're looking for, you're gonna find yourself actually progressing a lot slower. You can also just track resources for workbenches or anything you're crafting and so on, and only focus on the items with a track icon on them. I'd also recommend using resources online such as the Metaforge.app website, where you can track all the necessary items for quests and such. You've also got a skill tree planner and others. I'm sure there's a ton of other cool websites out there, but this is the one I'm using as of right now. The link is going to be in the description. I think it's also a good time to talk about fruits. What can you find fruits? More specifically, let's talk about lemon, apricot, prickly pears, olives, and mushrooms, as they're necessary for leveling up Scrappy. Listen, in this segment, I was going to give you guys a few great locations, which I found in my own personal attempts, but as of the time of recording this video, there are a couple of interactive maps out there, both on Metaforge as well as on this website here, arcraidermaps.app, which I'll have linked down below, which shows all of the potential spawns, and of course they're going to be filling in as they find more and more location. So just check these websites out, as they will show you all of the locations for lemon, apricot, prickly pears, olives, and mushrooms, and more. Still on the resource side of tips, another basic tip that is essential to know is you can dismantle items mid-run, and these will give you some resources. But if you actually just bring those same items out of the raid and you recycle them in Speranza, it will actually yield far more resources. So only dismantle when in a pinch. Another interesting resource tip that I picked up is if you have some green or blue weapons that you don't really care much for, or weapons that are nearly broken that you don't care for repairing, just recycle them into resources that you can then utilize to craft, upgrade, or repair the weapons you do prefer using. This works extremely well with the tip of always leaving a weapon slot open, and will eventually lead to you having a bunch of weapons in your stash that you don't really care that much for. So you can recycle them pretty comfortably, and as these materials are pretty important, this will make your life a whole lot easier. Another decent resource tip are the Assorted Seeds. Another basic one, but you can trade these for genuine materials, and they also kind of serve as a wild card common material. What I mean by wild card is you can trade one seed for any one common material. So Assorted Seeds are kind of like the legendary common materials. Always prioritize these over any other parts. They also sell for a hefty 10k per 100 stack. Although you may just prefer trading them, but yeah, it's still decent to sell to push for stash expansions. Another extremely important game knowledge tip that will go a long way for you, making your resource gathering smoother, is knowing what each object is likely going to drop you. For example, these machines right here, no matter where you find them in the map, even if it's, let's say, at a medical place, will always yield you similar resources. Which in the case of this machine here, it almost always gives mechanical components. So let's say if you're in the search for those and you spot one of these machines out, you can find mechanical components on them pretty reliably, no matter where they are on the map. Of course, over the course of hundreds, maybe thousands of hours, players will pick up what each object is more or less inclined to drop. So all I'm saying is kind of keep that in mind as you're out there exploring and learn your drops. Now, interestingly enough, those machines I just mentioned require breaching, which is a great segue into the next trick. If you're breaching, let's say a door, don't breach from the middle. Breach from one of the corners. This will allow you to actually turn your camera around and look behind you, whereas if you breach from the middle, you can't. I don't know if this is intentional or not, but as of the time of this recording, it still is the case. Another trick is the mantling from big drops trick. You can pretty much mantle onto anything, even from a big fall, which can lead to some really cool but rather questionable moments, considering you don't really take any fall damage from doing this. On the same note of avoiding damage, one very basic tip is you can dodge roll as you land from a high fall to prevent some fall damage. After a certain point, it will of course stop working and hurt you quite a bit, but this tip is extremely important to always do to have top tier movement. Now let's go with a zipline extraction tip. Placing a zipline that connects a high ground to the extraction will guarantee your safe extraction while giving you the upper hand on any fight that may develop from this extraction point. If you're feeling extra frisky, you could even do this to kind of prevent anyone from taking this extraction, but yeah, we don't condone any extraction camping out there. This tip is a bit more niche as you'll really only have 1 to 2 extraction per map where this is viable, with the exception of course Buried City, but I should point it out anyways as it should guarantee you a safe extraction. While on the subject of ziplines, I think anyone that has played Ark for more than a few dozen hours will tell you that ziplines are pretty essential for high level of playing, especially for PvP. You're able to position yourself in high ground and constantly give you that third-person shooter edge by utilizing it. There's no better tool out there than the zipline to constantly give you this edge, not to mention of course all of the other benefits you gain by using these properly. When you are recovering, make sure to heal first. The shield doesn't completely block off damage, it just kind of mitigates a percentage of that damage as it states on the shield. So the health is always a priority. Also, a lot of the health bandages heal very slowly, and you can't use another heal until the first one finishes. So you're better off doing a bandage, then shielding, then back onto another bandage if necessary. This way you save a bit more time and you of course play it safer as well. If you have multiple types of healing utilities such as bandages and sterilizers for example, prioritize the weaker healing tools first when in non-dangerous situations, such as for example when you take a little bit of damage from Arc but are not currently in combat, you will want to use a bandage there. But if you're in mid-combat in PvP for example, prioritize the bigger heals as they will of course heal for a lot more and often a lot faster as well. Don't just heal mindlessly like using big bandages when you're not in immediate danger just to make it faster. Keep those big ones for combat. Another quick little bonus tip that some players didn't know is that fabric, the crafting material, can actually also heal you. Think of them as weaker bandages, much like the Arc power cells, which are kind of weaker shield recharges. Another hidden mechanic some people are unaware of is that when shield recharging or healing, if you take any damage while that shield is recharging, it will completely cancel out the recharge and essentially make you waste that shield recharge or heal. So if you're for example thinking of shield recharging and then peeking somebody, don't do it. If you're thinking of shield recharging while a Wasp is taking shots at you, also don't do it. This is also why shield resurges and Vita shots are so good. You can use it and immediately engage without having to wait for the full recovery to happen. As for shield swapping, it is still a thing in Arc Raiders, but it has been severely nerfed. You can still shield swap, but the fully stacked shield will gain slowly its shield back instead of already being at 100%. It can be worth shield swapping if you're suspecting your shield might break mid-raid, but not to try to gain an edge in PvP. It's far too slow for that. Also, one noteworthy game mechanic you should know is that each raid lasts 30 minutes. So if you spawn at around 29 minutes and 30 seconds, then you've spawned in the first batch of players alongside 17 other players. If you spawn with say 20 minutes left on the clock, then you know that raid has been happening for 10 minutes. But the tip also is if you spawn mid-raid, it could be better to prioritize PvP over looting, because the players who have been in the raid since the start will likely already have looted the map plenty. So the map is going to be less plentiful, but the players will be full of loot. And in a lot of cases, the players will also have wasted a lot of their healing materials as well to keep them up until that point. But I mean, it's kind of a gamble, of course. But yeah, if you spawn mid-raid, generally the big loots will be in the players' backpacks, no longer in the actual map. On the same note, I've spawned in as late as about 17 minutes left on the clock. Personally, I just assume that players spawn up until the 15-minute mark. So keep an eye out there for those edges of the map until then. And to close this video off, always dismantle your enemy's weapons that you don't need or can't fit, and try to bring the parts with you. Those parts are extremely important, and you definitely don't want somebody looting that body, getting that weapon and using it on you. And that'll be all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys are enjoying Arc Raiders as well. I'm gonna go ahead and get back topside. I'll be catching you legends later. Peace.